This week, India and the European Union signed what the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described as
the mother of all deals.
under the agreement, tariffs will be cut or removed on about 96% of goods traded between India and the EU. Import duties on European cars are set to fall from levels as high as 110% to around 10%, with similar phased cuts for wines, spirits, machinery, and chemicals. Almost immediately after the announcement, the conversation has shifted to one question: what gets cheaper? European wine, cheese, chocolates, and cars, of course. Now, the assumption behind this is quite natural. If tariffs come down, prices should follow because that is how trade liberalization is supposed to work. But here's where the story gets more complicated. Trade agreements do not operate like budget announcements. They don't change prices overnight and they do not affect every product the same way. In fact, history shows that even larger tariff cuts often take years to show up in consumer prices. And sometimes they don't show up at all. And that is because tariffs are just one layer in a much larger pricing system. Between a customs duty and a consumer price tag sit importers, distributors, retailers, domestic taxes, state level regulations, and long term contracts which are already locked in at older prices. Each of those layers respond to changes in their own timeline. And the India EU deal is no different. Many tariff cuts are phased over several years. Some apply only to limited quantities, other lower costs for businesses long before they lower prices for consumers. And in sectors like alcohol, automobiles, domestic taxes, and market structure play a far bigger role in pricing than customs duties ever did. So, while the headlines focus on what might get cheaper, the more important question is what actually happens between a trade agreement being signed and prices changing in the real economy. Welcome to Daybreak, a business podcast from the Ken. I'm your host Nigdha Sharma, and I don't chase the news cycle. Instead, every day of the week, my colleague Rachel Varghese and I will come to you with one business story that is worth understanding and worth your time. Today is Thursday, the 29th of January. So, when people talk about this deal, the conversation quickly lands on wine, cheese, chocolates, and cars, because that is where the public interest is right now. But the agreement itself starts working somewhere else. So, let us look at what this deal is all about in the first place. The India EU trade deal resets tariff rules for more than 90% of goods traded between the two sides. Some of those changes apply immediately, many others are scheduled over time. The key thing is that the agreement lays out a calendar, product by product, sector by sector, of how costs will evolve. India removes tariffs right away on about 30% of European goods. For everything else, reductions are written into future phases. That includes several of the products making the headlines. Wine, beer, spirits, which currently face import duties of more than 36%, are of course covered by the deal. But those tariffs will come down in stages. Each cut applies only to shipments cleared after that phase begins. Importers will be tracking those dates closely because they will determine when the new cost structures actually kick in. Cheese and other processed foods are included as well, again with phased reductions. Some agricultural products remain excluded, but for many European food items, the deal creates a clear pathway for lower duties over time rather than an immediate change at the border. Cars, meanwhile, sit in a category of their own. India will allow up to 250,000 European cars a year under a quota system. Within that quota, tariffs start at about 30 to 35% and then move down further to about 10% over 5 to 10 years. On the industrial side, the deal removes or reduces tariffs on machinery, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, where duties currently range from 11 to more than 40%. The European Commission estimates that once these changes are fully in place, EU could save around 4 billion euros a year in duties. The EU, in return, is removing tariffs on 90% of Indian goods immediately, rising to 93% within 7 years. This covers textiles, garments, leather goods, and gems and jewelry, which are sectors that face pressure after the Trump tariffs. For those exporters, Europe now offers a clearer, more stable market. So, at this stage, what the deal really does is lock in access and timelines. Companies will start adjusting plans, contracts, and supply decisions around these schedules. Stay tuned to understand why price changes actually arrive much later, even when the tariff math looks dramatic on paper. To understand why prices often take so long to change, it helps to look at what's happened in previous trade agreements. One of the most closely tracked cases comes from research at Harvard Business School, which followed how companies responded to tariff changes during the US China trade war. The researchers looked at thousands of products across retail categories, and what they found was simple and a little counterintuitive. Changes in tariffs showed up quickly in import costs, but much more slowly and unevenly in retail prices. In fact, in many cases, retailers did not adjust prices at all. And when they did, the changes were often small, delayed, or temporary. The study also found that companies used tariff related cost changes to manage margins, hedge against uncertainty, or absorb other rising costs rather than immediately passing them on to customers. And that behavior matters here because it shows that even when tariffs move sharply, prices do not automatically follow. Businesses treat tariff changes as one input among many. Rent, wages, logistics, marketing costs, and taxes all compete for attention in pricing decisions. Then there is also an asymmetry in how prices move. The Harvard research showed that companies are generally quicker to raise prices when costs go up than they are to cut prices when costs fall. Lower costs tend to get absorbed quietly across balance sheets, especially in categories where consumers are less price sensitive. And that pattern shows up clearly in premium goods. Imported wine, cheese, European cars all fall into that category in India. These products, bought occasionally, are not weekly staples. Demand does not swing sharply with small price changes, and that gives sellers room to hold prices steady even when costs begin to ease. Which is why most of the tariff cuts in the India EU deal are going to be phased over several years, especially for sensitive sectors like alcohol, automobiles, and processed foods. Some duties will be reduced early, others will come in gradually in steps that stretch 5, 7, and even sometimes 10 years. Also, there are other factors. Wine is actually a good example. Yes, import duties on European wine are expected to come down over time, but even when the deal kicks in, alcohol pricing in India is shaped way more by state excise duties than by customs tariffs alone. Basically, alcohol taxes are set by states and not the center, and those levies can account for a very large share of the final retail price. So, even when import duties fall, state taxes stay exactly where they are. Basically, Delhi does sign the trade deal, but states will ultimately decide how expensive your wine is. Also, important to remember is that consumer prices tend to respond only when competition intensifies. When more suppliers enter the market, volumes rise, and retailers start fighting for market share. And that process takes time. So, when people expect this deal to quickly make European goods cheaper, they are really expecting the final step of a long chain to happen first. Trade agreements rearrange incentives long before they rearrange the price tags. And that is the real answer to the question at the heart of this episode. Between a deal being signed and prices changing in the real economy is a long stretch of adjustment inside companies, inside supply chains, and inside markets.
Daybreak is produced from the newsroom of the Ken, India's first subscriber-focused business news platform. What you're listening to is just a small sample of our subscriber-only offerings, and a full subscription offers daily, long-form feature stories, newsletters, and a whole bunch of premium podcasts. To subscribe, head to theken.com and click on the red subscribe button on the top of the website. Today's episode was hosted and produced by my colleague Snigdha